Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our live discussion of Light from Uncommon Stars by Ryka Aoki. I'm joined here today by Joan from The Rabbit Hole. And for those of you who don't know, Light from Uncommon Stars is about legendary violinist Shizuka Satomi has made a deal with the devil. Her soul will be spared from hell if she delivers 7 souls in her place. After damning 6 of her students already, Shizuka seeks her final soul, and when she meets runaway transgender teen Katrina, she believes she has found what she is looking for. Meanwhile, the local donut shop has a secret of its own. Run by a family of aliens in disguise who have fled their home, which is riddled with war. Head of family Lan Tran balances taking care of her family, running the shop, building a portal back to her homeworld, and now newfound feelings for an attractive frequent customer, which so happens to be Shizuka. Um, so, any starting thoughts about the book, Joan?
Um, I guess I'll say that this definitely went beyond my expectations for the book, but also was a book that became really hard to describe because of just how non-conforming it is to any specific genre. Like, I don't really know how to describe this book to people who I meet and try to like convince them to read the book. I'm like, okay, well, what really is this book actually about?
Right. It's definitely a good mix of um slightly fantasy elements, slightly sci-fi elements. It's very rooted in a contemporary world, and also I feel like it um, really captures the local aesthetic of. I can't remember what part of California it takes place in. San Gabriel, I think.
I think so. I also forgot.
Yeah, but it's just I feel like the actual physical location has its own character because it's just so like well developed, I think. And I am kind of assuming that Rika has probably lived there at some point in her life and is basing it off of her own experiences, but it is just feels so authentic. It feels like I've been there now, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting too because the other week I was in one of my writing classes and we were talking about like character or like place as a character, and I was trying to think of books I've read recently that fit that category and like really stand out to me, and this was definitely one of them. And I
Yeah.
think it's interesting because I like that you can research a place all you want and write about it, and that's an awesome thing to do. But it's really cool when you get to write about a place you actually care about and know
Hmm.
so much about, and then build a story in it.
Right.
And I think that that was a really cool feature of this book. Like, I felt like I was transported to this specific part of California, and like I suddenly became like a tourist of that
Yeah.
area as I was going through the book. Just so much history, especially like the history of like the music shops, the history
Hmm.
of the donut shops, like just so much richness in those
And it
stories.
felt so authentic to just like she would give histories of both the music shop and the donut shop. You know, there's this whole history to the donut shop before the trans, you know, started owning it, you know. And I really like that. I like that we get the history of why it's called Stargate Donut in the first place. And it just details like that just made it feel so much more real. um Before we did this discussion today, I was watching a video that Rika did with Charlie Jane Anders, who's another author I really love. And she mentioned that the donut shop was based off of a place she had actually been, and that kind
Ooh.
of like being at that donut shop and like wanting to capture that in the story sounds like it was one of the main things that inspired her to write this book. And I definitely get the sense from reading it, because that was like one of my favorite aspects of this book, was just the concept of the donut shop, you know?
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that. I love when people like take things that mean a lot to them in their real life and just kind of transport them into like what is the correct term, like a non-realistic setting. Like
Yeah. It like captures it without like entirely cloning it, you know? I don't think it's the exact Stargate donut. I don't think that's a real place that Rika's been, but I think it's based off of a donut shop that she really loved. And you definitely get that sense from reading it too, you know, that this is based off of a real location that means a lot to the author.
yeah. I really did enjoy the setting of this book. I also enjoyed how much of the setting also included just a lot of diversity overall, just that like the different types of like food that the characters eat, the different kinds of restaurants they find themselves in. It's interesting that food becomes such a big part of this, especially because like we have the cast of aliens who like they don't really know anything about human food, and
Mm-hmm.
so like they're like making replicated donuts they think are okay, but they're actually kind of sad because they're not like real donuts. And like they have these like situations where they go out and they start to eat human food and like explore taste and flavor. And is it, I forget, is it like the grandma
Mm-hmm.
who like becomes kind of into cooking in the end?
I
That
think
was
it's
kind
the
of really,
grandma and the twin boy.
yeah, I was like, wow, that's kind of cool.
I really like that, just because like I am someone who gets so passionate about food, that honestly, like going out and exploring like small independent restaurants is kind of the way I like to get to know an area. So getting to see that in this book, and again, what you said, the diversity, I feel like so much Asian American culture was just like perfectly represented in this book. And I think, again, also added to that like feeling of realism, that it wasn't only just like that she took us to this place in California, but it also is like this is what the culture is like for Asian Americans, told from the perspective of an Asian American with Asian American characters. Although I think Shizuka is originally Japanese. I don't know if she's technically American. Um,
Yeah, that was a question I had, but you know, it's also interesting because like her kind of another interesting element in that like she's been around for so long, which kind of played with my mind because I kind of got like this vibe of a much younger person
mhm,
throughout most of the book, and when it finally dawned on me like that she was like much older because like she gets 7 years for each student.
mhm.
So by this point like she's already been doing this, what, 7 times 6.
Oh my god, I wasn't prepared
Oh
to do
no,
math
math, and it's
today.
the hard
Mm,
numbers too. But she's been doing this a while. She like first started doing this. So she's been around a while, and she's been all over the world too, because like all of her students come from different parts of the world as well. And like she has like a very traditional like classical music background, and that she has traveled kind of the world in search of the best music locations. And so she also kind of comes off as worldly, but also not connected to any one place or person, which is also very interesting because like, is it Astrid? I think that's her name. The like house assistant.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, I found it interesting that like she was her anchor almost. Like she would always go back to this house when she had time and like be with Astrid. Um, and I never really figured out how old she was either. Like
Yeah.
how long have they known each other?
I
When did they meet? I have so interesting that she has like so few things and so few people in her life that are consistent. She's just kind of unattached.
Yeah, I was like half expecting like there to be some sort of reveal about Astrid, that like maybe she's a demon or something, or some other like ageless being. Just because, yeah, kind of how Shizuka feels like, she almost feels like a vampire to me reading this book, because she doesn't age how she should be aging, or how a normal person would be aging. And she's kind of like simultaneously really experienced, but also kind of stuck at the same time, which I feel like is a common trope for vampires, is that, you kind of get stuck in this certain age, despite the fact that you're living like decades after decades and not really changing as a person. And yeah, I really feel a little bit cheated that we never got that background between her and Astrid. There's something kind of maternal about Astrid towards Shizuka, that like, she's quite literally the caretaker, not only of the house, but, she makes miso soup for Shizuka when she's having a bad day, So there's just like this like intimacy and this hard to define relationship between the two of them. She almost reminds me of like Alfred or something from Batman, that she's like this like insanely cool like butler character. Who kind of unfortunately gets brushed to the side, but is such a amazing character in her own. But we don't know much about her.
Yeah, and that was another interesting thing for me. Like, if I had any real commentary on like anything that held this book back, I feel like it would just be that I needed more information on Shizuka's like background.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it wasn't really fleshed out, and I still was left on kind of not knowing why she would enter a pact with a demon in the first place. Like, I was kind of confused on that still at the end, and I felt like I wanted to really understand that better.
Yeah, one of the things that came up when I was writing my summary, like 20 minutes before the show started, I kind of found myself wondering, why did Shizuka choose Katrina, especially knowing how things were gonna end? You know, that's like the motivation behind that. I feel like is something that was never really answered. And I understand why Katrina, embraced this opportunity, and she really entered it with this attitude of like, I probably not going to live very long just because I'm transgender. Like, she's been through a lot of hardship because of that already. So she kind of has already accepted that her life is going to be limited and she's going to have limited opportunities. So I understand things from Katrina's perspective, but it kind of is hard to reconcile what Shizuka was thinking, because it seems like she's trying to help Katrina, but she has these ulterior motives. How does she, justify that to herself, that, this time, instead of choosing, the rich kids who have grown up with like, private violin tutors all their life, she chooses this very vulnerable person instead. And, you know, uh, it's gonna cheat her out of her life because of it. So that I found really missing an explanation, and I don't know that there was ever explanation there in the book.
Yeah, I don't think so. And I also think I really would have liked to know more about her various relationships with her previous students. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you get little glimpses from time to time, but it just doesn't really feel like enough. Like, I think one of her students, she had sort of a romantic relationship with almost, and I
Yeah.
didn't really get enough information to understand what that looked like. Like, she's painted out to be in the start of the book this almost like evil villain type character who's just like going to steal your soul.
Yeah.
And like, people seem to know her reputationally for being kind of a cold person,
Mm-hmm.
but yet she's the complete opposite as an actual character. Like, there is nothing cold or hard about her. which I think is such a strange juxtaposition. Because
Yes.
she comes off really warm, very maternal, almost very caring, very interested in changing things. I mean, she goes on cute dates. Like
Yeah.
all of it is just very soft and cuddly. So it's like really hard when she has this persona of being like the queen of hell and being like really intense, that like I don't get that. And I don't know if that's like supposed to be like just a sign of her aging, that like she's just gotten older.
I think she definitely comes off as very jaded at the start of the book, and it probably is because she had to have made these really horrific choices by sacrificing all of her students up until that point. But I didn't really see too much what the turning point was, because when she first meets Katrina, she's just so welcoming to her. And I guess the persona thing makes me wonder if it's, like who your public face is versus who you are on the inside. And I feel like most public people have that different face they put on for show. And maybe because like Shizuka is a woman and she's Asian, maybe she has felt so vulnerable in the past that she has had to put on that persona. So maybe it's a way she has protected herself. Um, but that was never explicitly said. That's just kind of me speculating after having read the book. And I don't know. I feel like there should have been more definition there if that was what Ryka was going with when she wrote this.
Yeah. I'm really not sure.
It is interesting though. Like I will say this book has given me so much to think about.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing too, is how much information does an author owe you in the story, and how much is like you have to figure out what to think about characters, what you think has happened in their past. Like I think this book is really good being a snapshot of the present. Like you don't really go down too many rabbit holes into like any of the characters' pasts. Like you get just tiny bits of information, but you have to make a decision about how you feel about all the characters based on who they are today and what their choices are today. Which I think is so interesting because like I wonder if any of these characters, if like this was like 5 years earlier or something.
Yeah, they would be way different, I think.
Yeah, which like interestingly enough, and to just sort of shift points of view when we're looking at the trans, that's another very interesting element. Like they just kind of have escaped their home world through the guise of tourism.
Yeah.
To come to Earth because there's like a plague that's coming for their home world. It's kind of wacky. I was like, I don't understand, what is their actual goal? Like, what are they doing here?
Right. I kind of was a little confused about like the building of the Stargates plot, especially because what it became by the end of the book was so different than when it started as. But I really like the plot of them escaping and them using the excuse of tourism as a means to escape their homeworld without raising too much suspicion. I feel like that probably has a lot of relation to like real life refugee stories, that you kind of have to bullshit your way through some hoops to. I'm sorry, I think I lost signal for a moment there. And now I lost my train of thought. But yeah, when Shizuka first meets Lan, and she makes the assumption that she is from Thailand, I think.
Something like that, yeah. His like refugee from somewhere.
Oh, she's Vietnamese, so she thought
Okay.
she was a refugee from the Vietnam War, which I thought was such a cool relation to real life events and real life people. because I think we tend to repeat mistakes a lot in history. So to me, it makes sense that, if there are aliens and if they are like us, they are going to make the same decisions as us in life.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. I found just their whole setup to be kind of unique. Just like of all the things that you would choose to do as like a group of alien refugees, like to like buy a donut shop and start like replicating donuts. And the fact that they do it so well, like they want to blend, like couldn't they have just in theory bought the donut shop, just closed it and lived in it like a weird working building while they built the Stargate? Like who would really know? But
Right.
instead they have this huge thing where they have to keep up the facade of being a real donut shop and like making donuts.
Yeah.
Which I think is quite funny. Also, yeah, it was interesting to see like Lan's style of parenting, given that like she's from another planet and we don't get to know a lot about the like family structures in her home world. So I'm not really sure what we're supposed to think of her as a parent, but she is very almost very focused on her goals, on science, on like building the Stargate thing. Like she's not really too attentive to the actual feelings of her children, which I think is like how some not great things happen with her family during their time at the donut shop. She's just kind of all consumed by her main goals and not really paying attention to like the emotional well-being of her family. And it's kind of interesting to see how like she becomes all consumed by like her goals.
Yeah, and I think it's especially interesting because you can see how much she cares about her family and how upset she is about, when she fixates on playing the Stargate games, and she's playing this game that just continuously creates more and more levels. There's never ever a final ending to it, and she kind of just plays it obsessively, thinking like, somehow she's gonna finally save people in the end from this invasion in the game. I've never actually played Stargate. And so it's weird because you can see that like she's worried and that she's weighted by the situation she's in, and she's scared for her family and she wants to do right by them, but at the same time she's kind of hurting them at the same time, like unintentionally of course, but I think that's so true for how family sometimes functions, or how love sometimes functions, that you get so fixated, you get so weighed down that like you kind of become blind sometimes.
Yeah, and I also found it quite interesting that there are two very interesting points in the book where both Shizuka and Lan go head to head on what they believe is a good moral sense of being responsible for people, and how they're just kind of very freaked out by the other person, what they would choose to do, what their worldview is. And they don't see that they're actually extremely similar to each other, but they have like different sets of morals, which I think is hilarious that you can, at least in Shizuka's case, you can work for a demon and still have like a moral background.
Right. And I kind of like that too, especially because they end up being a couple. I like that they're both kind of not perfect in their own ways, and not perfect in very similar ways too, whether they see it or not. Like I
Yeah.
thought, like narratively, that was so perfect.
Right. I also found it just so weird that like Lan's like, well, I'm from another planet, and she's like, yeah, that makes sense. Aliens, cool. Like, not a single question.
I mean, to be fair, she like deals with demons, so it's kind of like, okay, if anyone's gonna be chill with that, it's gonna be the person who has to deal with a demon, Like, I can't even say that's weird because, like, I've been giving up the souls of my students for the past 50 years, Like, who am I to judge?
Yeah. Well, I think we're just about halfway through, so maybe we should move to the land of the spoilers.
Okay, yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I think the ending was both expected and unexpected to me. I definitely saw it coming. Like she's not gonna end up reaping Katrina's soul. Like if she did, this book would be terrible, and I'd be so sad. You know what I mean? So I kind of figured that. I'm trying to like think of the actual ending because I feel like there's a lot of like almost deception at the ending, if that makes sense. That like Katrina takes the dogwood bow without Shizuka knowing, and she's ready to give herself up to save Shizuka, pretty much. And then, then it's revealed that, oh, like, it's not the actual bow, this is a replication, and Shizuka kind of figured this would happen, so she made the second bow to kind of trick Katrina. And then the very end of, which I don't even know if Shizuka was in on this, but, her saying her goodbyes, and then, Lan pretty much sweeps her away in the spaceship and they run off into space, that part was definitely unexpected to me. And it was really fast, and there wasn't much hint that any of that was going to happen. And I don't know if that works in favor or against of the story, because like we've discussed, there's a lot of nuance in this book, so I feel like the author just wanted to take us on this journey rather than have us be in on the scheme as well. But yeah, what are your general thoughts on the ending or anything spoilery?
I mean, the ending I definitely felt quite moved by. I felt like I was expecting, either one of two things, as an outcome for this story, that either Katrina would give up her soul or like Shizuka would not let that happen and would die, like one of those two endings. And so the actual ending was not at all what I was expecting. And I was greatly moved by the fact that, like, with such a short period, I don't know if it's fresh, but like with such a short period of time of knowing each other, like about a year or so, that like Lan has decided that the best plan is like she has to kidnap this woman that she loves from Earth. And I found that was like kind of cute and moving. I felt like, wow, that's just so sweet that like this is like your course of action in the end. And I felt like I really felt that was a good ending.
I definitely think it's the best ending.
For me, I liked how it ended. Or again, it left a lot of things like unspoken, undiscussed, but like I felt like it had the closure I had been looking for.
Yeah, there's something really beautiful about that like mental image of, these two probably late middle-aged women just like running off into space to try to save Lan's world, and while also saving Shizuka from damnation. It's a really, really cool ending.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I think is really important here is like often in literature, like now as we're moving towards a point where there is a lot more queer representation as a whole in literature, it still tends to aim towards very young protagonists. Yeah. And it's very interesting in this story, we do get people that are middle-aged and are queer and are just living their lives. And I think that that's kind of cool. Like they don't have any questions about their sexuality. Like I don't think Shizuka or Lan are like debating anything. They know who they are. They know what they want. And they've just kind of found the perfect relationship for them. And I found that that was really cool and kind of like nice and uncomplicated to see, like that they just like know from the start, like this kind of person is who like I'm attracted to, who I want to be with, and I like want to form a relationship with this person. Yeah.
Yeah, super important for like representation. You don't see it too much. It's usually the kids. um, I I do feel like we got a little cheated with Katrina's storyline in the very end because I feel like it gets very ambiguous, and it's only because the story kind of focuses on Shizuka and Lan's perspective at the very end. I wish we got at least like one snapshot on Earth of Katrina's life. I mean, there's like I think Katrina like sent her a message or something, and we kind of get um, the sense of where Katrina is in her life through Shizuka staying in contact with her. But I don't know. I do kind of feel like we were a little cheated of what does her life look like now, after she had this very tumultuous year where she kind of found herself. I feel like Katrina's journey in this book was very positive, but also very messy and very much about trying to find your confidence after, going through hell, um, that it would be nice to see not that Katrina's life is perfect, but that she is like a stronger, braver woman now because of this.
Yeah, I felt ultimately that Katrina's journey is just starting, and maybe
Mhm.
that was why it wasn't really, it didn't want to give us a like concrete end of what to think, because Katrina still has so much to do and grow into just to even be herself. And I think that there's, I don't know, beauty in not rushing
Mm.
like an ending or how things are going to go for a person, or like would they find out like their dream goal, or like where they're going to be for their life. um I felt that Katrina's story was very it was circular. Like it got to a point where it went through all of the major things it needed to go through, and then we know that like she'll probably go through most of that again,
Mm.
until she gets to a point where she feels stable in her identity, who she is, and how she presents to the world. I
Mhm.
don't think she hit a point where she was like finally able to really accept who she was, and I think that that's still going to take some time. um,
Mhm.
yeah, I really did enjoy though that like in that in the end, like we still get this sense that like Katrina and Shirley are still friends, because like
Yeah.
I love Shirley. I don't know why I became obsessed with this character, but I did. And like I love that she finally gets like a mobile unit so that she can be on the go. And I was like, Shirley's out in the world.
Yeah. That's so cool. I feel like, especially what's is great about their friendship is that they kind of have like this um, kind of parallel storyline, where in some senses people probably don't view Shirley as a real woman either because she's literally an AI. But she's as autonomous and has as many feelings as a human does. I thought like her storyline was really cool and while kind of falling into the tropes of most AI stories I've read, I found it almost shocking, her and Lan's relationship at its tensest moments, where Lan is kind of like, yeah, we'll just power her down. She's not efficient anymore. And I'm like, this is, someone who calls you mother. This is someone who is based off of a child that's, you had that died. It's just like, I was just like, how can you um be so callous about that? How can you not see Shirley as human? Uh, so that plot in particular was just kind of so shocking. I don't. It's hard to put like words to my feelings on it, but like I really liked it at the same time, though. It was so different.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that like we get glimpses into the culture that the trans came from through these kinds of interactions, like what they would think to be normal.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't really give like their identity, like what are people like from their planet. We
Right.
don't actually know like what are their values, what kind of species are they. We don't get a ton of background information, but we can figure out from like the choices that they make and the things they choose to do what their society might value. And so it might just be the case that the planet they come from, like maybe they use AI a lot, but don't actually see them as like fully realized beings.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is an interesting like juxtaposition to Katrina, and how like for most of the world doesn't really recognize trans people as real people, as people deserving of rights and like just common decency. And so like what are the like parallels between like being an AI on, I don't even, did they have a planet name?
I cannot think of a single one, and I'm not
From?
gonna flip through the book, so.
Yeah, so I don't, from mysterious planet X, maybe being an AI there is sort of like being trans on Earth, who knows. But I feel like they were trying really hard there to build like this parallel.
Yeah. And I just thought it was so brilliant, how Katrina just like steps up and is like, no, like we're not letting Shirley go home, like she's staying here, and like she just gets so protective over her, and then they have this friendship kind of stemmed from that. um they have that clear solidarity with each other, I think, because of that. But yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah. I mean, with this too, I felt that there were so many characters that just kind of went outside of the bounds of what we think of as normal in society, and then we're so open to accepting difference, even if it wasn't some to understand. And I felt like that was the one thing I really loved about like the cast of this book, is everyone tried really hard to understand the mindsets of people that they didn't share a ton in common
Mm-hmm.
with.
I think like womanhood in general, I think, had a strong theme in this, and the character of Lucia, I think, or Lucy, who is the violin shop worker. I really liked her plot and how it was just this, she comes from this long line of violinists, or I can't remember what the term was for someone who makes violins. Um,
I
and
can't either.
and it was always passed down, through the men, this ability to make violins. And even though she would help out, like her effort was kind of always undervalued, and she was really like demeaned by like her grandpa, even for trying to take interest in the family business. And obviously she has a talent for it, but just like years and years of being berated, even after all of the like men older than her in the family are gone, she just like doubts herself and her capabilities, even as she's trying to make this shop. And there's a part where she like mourns her son not being able to learn from a man and having to learn from herself, because she thinks it won't be the same if she passes on the skills herself rather than one of the men. And I don't know, I just like, I love that plot so much, because again, I feel like there's so much about womanhood in this book, and I feel like that is also like, it just ties into this general theme of like, you know, like who you're born as, I think, you know.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting point, there are various kinds of women in this book with very different backgrounds and also very different reasons to have, I don't know, trepidations about what it is to be a woman and movie, and they all have, you know, a hard time to understanding each other because they're all so different. But yet at the core, there's something similar there, right? That like there is an innate struggle in this story. Like, what are the things that you are able to accomplish as a woman?
Yeah, I feel like there's like something about like Lucia's plot reminds me of Katrina's plot, you know, and they're these two different women born from two different family lines and put through different struggles, but at the core it's kind of all the same of how we treat women. So yeah, I just thought like this plot absolutely belonged in this book, and I think really just helps the whole story and this whole message of womanhood really shine through, I think.
Yeah, I also loved kind of it was hard for me at first to get into the writing style, but once I was in it, I really enjoyed it because it felt almost like a collective consciousness. Like you were really in the thick of like living in this group of people's lives in like a very detailed and like confidential feeling way. Like you got into the thoughts and feelings of so many random characters that like they just kind of all overlapped on each other, that there's like this experience that humans are having, and not just humans, aliens, the humans, the aliens, the demons, they're all having together, that like put together the fabric of struggles that people in general are trying to overcome. It felt kind of weird, but kind of comforting to be like in this like nest of people's lives.
I mean, I really love that concept of just like all these very different people experiencing the same things in their own different ways. But the writing style really turned me off. I'm sorry, that's one of my least favorite things about this book is just it felt too chaotic to me. But like I think it's just like the writing style was just not for me. Otherwise, like I absolutely love this book. But for me, I couldn't help getting kind of pulled out of the story with the chaos of how the writing would be, and that it would change POV very randomly, and oftentimes I would be like, I don't know who we're following. And like I am so disoriented because I know there was a POV change, but I can't figure out who we're following. And paragraph breaks I felt were used very liberally. I wish she had a way of breaking up paragraphs to better indicate this is a paragraph break because I wanted a dramatic pause, which she would sometimes do, or this is a paragraph break because time has passed, or this is a paragraph break because it's a scene change or a POV change. I felt like there could have been a better way that that was handled, whether it was just like, you know, using, I don't know, asterisks. I don't actually remember off the top of my head what like the standard format is for that, but it was just too chaotic in my opinion, and it would just kind of pull me out of the story because I would be thinking about the actual writing style versus the story.
Yeah.
But
I think
she tried something, so
yeah.
I'm happy.
I don't know why I like this kind of weird. I'm sure it has some kind of name, but like I read quite a few books in the last couple of years that do this thing where it's just like the most random people and the point of view changes sometimes within the same paragraph. And as disorienting it is, there's some part of me that really likes it. And I don't really know why that is. Maybe it's just because it's just like so out there. And like breaks so many of the norms of how writing is supposed to work, and like breaks the way from the fact that you like can have a story that's told through a specific point of view. And like even when you have books where like you have different chapters or sections where like the POV changes, I like this because like it shows that like the world is messy and that everything is stacked on top of each other, that it's like a shared narrative. And it's actually kind of similar because it's very similar to the style that I used to write in when I first started writing. Like I went to, I think, my first writing workshop in college, and people were so mad at me because they couldn't figure out who was speaking when, because the characters, the 5 of them, would share space in the same paragraphs. And I was like, has this not been done yet? I can't believe this hasn't been done. And the answer is it has been done multiple times. It's just some people, actually I shouldn't say just some people, a lot of people just don't get. It's kind of hard to understand how that works. And like even with the case of this book, like at the start I really didn't like it for like the first like quarter of the book. And then once I got over that, I like fell in love with it. Which is such a weird thing to say, that like you can go from just being like, oh, this really turns me off, I don't like it, to this is really working. And then like, what does that mean for readers who have a harder time getting into something? Like, are they going to continue past that? Or are they just going to be like, this isn't for me, I'm just going to stop here? Yeah. Oh, I kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people did really like that about this. I'm just kind of a jerk about like, it's ruining my comprehension of the story, so I don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, there are different writing styles for different people too, right? Like we don't always have to like everything that's out there.
Right.
despite what they say about like, I don't know, having to be a reader and enjoying everything. Like clearly we know that there are certain types of books, genres, tropes, writing mechanics that we as readers don't personally like or jive with.
I mean, I think like a better advice for that is not love everything, but love a lot of different types. You don't have to love every single type of writing, but like diversify yourself a little bit, get some experience.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I do really appreciate that Ryka was trying something different with this book, and I feel like it's been a while I've read a like recent release that has like allowed itself to be very weird in that way, so I can appreciate that at least, even though it's not a personal favorite. But I feel like when I read older sci-fi versus newer sci-fi, it's always the older sci-fi that's more daring in the writing style. So it's nice to read something different for once that's a newer book, because not a lot of people are taking that risk. So I do give her so much credit for doing it and pulling it off.
Yeah, I like so much that this book had a different writing style, but also was just hard to classify in like genre and style. Like what would you say about it? How would you describe it to someone? I'm still stuck on that. Like I just like want to call it like an experience.
It really is. And I feel like there's so much love for violin in this book. I don't know if Ryka is a violinist herself, but like it just felt so authentic. And I'm not a violinist myself. I've never played violin. I did have an experience with music for some point in my life. I don't do that anymore. But I could still see like the love for that world, and also that like she depicted both like the terrible sides of it as well as the good sides, you know. Not just like the vulnerability, but kind of like the almost like supercilious nature of everyone in that field, you know. So.
Yeah, I get that. I feel like that also connects with like so many different forms of art, right? Like for me, I was like, oh, I'm not going to like this or get into this because I don't play music. I've never done it. And like, I don't have a huge interest in the realm of classical music. But like the parallels to being an artist in general in any form, and like having to put up with the standard or
Mm-hmm.
like the things that people honor or like think are super amazing. And then just wanting to be yourself. Like, you know, I think that Katrina really is just like not interested in any of that. She just wants to like do like the thing she likes, which is gaming music. And like she doesn't need to go to like a fancy conservatory or go through like huge competitions to get heard, because she can just put her music on YouTube. So
Yeah.
like I feel like that feels very much like, you know, the equivalent of like being a writer and being like, oh, it doesn't matter if I could really get published or anything. I'll just like post it on the internet somewhere and people can read my work. Like
Yeah.
it's just
Like,
kind of interesting that there's like that difference there, that like it doesn't have to be like the best, most amazing, most like award winning certified thing for it to like be real and meaningful to you as an artist.
right, yeah. And I feel like, oh, I just lost my train of thought. I was gonna bounce off of that though. I don't know. I guess like that, like, oh, now I remember what I was gonna say, but it was completely different. So I'm sorry. Do you have any final thoughts on that before I change topic?
No,
Okay.
that's fine. Go for it.
Yeah, for some reason I just thought of the part of the book where she kind of gets outed as a trans person and the competition. Um, man, I felt that just like kind of this, well, not only like taking away the opportunity for her to present herself as she wants, because there kind of was a reality that she could have just, you know, presented just as a woman and didn't have to have people know that she was a trans woman. Um, and that kind of gets taken from her. And I feel like as a creator and like trying to navigate being a creator as well as like, you know, how I want to share my identity with people, I feel like I have such a complicated relationship with that myself. Like I'm not ashamed of my identity, but at the same time, I it's like yes, like my sexuality does color a lot of like my writing and it colors how I read books. But it's not who I am at the same time. It's just a part of me, and I feel like the identity sometimes just takes over everything else. And you know, then you know we start to see people as just the identity. And I like the part of Katrina's like little bio that was like she's a trans activist. That's just like like made me so like emotional and almost upset, just like this concept that just because she exists and is being seen that it makes her an activist. And well, yes, it is very rebellious to be yourself. At the same time, it's just like that's not what she wanted to do. She just wants to be a musician, you know. And why do we, when we put ourselves out there and be authentic to ourselves, why do we have to be an activist, you know, when we're just trying to be ourselves? um it was just
Mm-hmm.
such a cool detail that I really appreciate in the book, and just again spurred a lot of emotion from me, like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's also been in my mind recently, you know, as I've been thinking of, you know, how to promote books like this and all books written by trans authors, is like there are a lot of books written by trans authors that don't have trans characters. And like
Hmm.
people sometimes are mad when I suggest those books. Like, this isn't a trans book. And I'm like, well, if a trans person wrote it, it's a trans book.
Yeah.
That's it. And you don't have to write trans people just because you're trans.
Hmm.
Like, just because you're queer, you don't have to write queer characters. Like, this, it's up to you. It is your decision what you choose to write. Um, and you know, I think that's like also the thing too, is there's a difference between like being an author who is trans and being a like capital T, like all the way trans author. Like, and right, you don't have to you don't have to be like, make your identity the whole part of your work, the whole part of your art. If you don't want to, it shouldn't be forced upon you. And especially if how you feel about that. And especially when like, maybe that's, you know, not really what you want. Like for the case of Katrina, like she's struggling so hard just to like be seen as a woman, and yet people don't want to. They want to like minimize her experience by making her a trans woman and not like a woman. Which I think is a very interesting thing, because, you know, depending on the trans person's experience, some trans people really desire to be seen as trans, and some trans people really don't desire to be seen as trans. And like, I think it's important that like we support what people want. Like if someone really just does not want to be promoted as like a trans artist, a trans activist, like why should we put that label on them if that's not something that they themselves chose?
But I feel like when you're in the public eye, it's inevitable. You know, it becomes a statement, and all you're doing is just existing and being yourself, you know, and it's not fair. Like, you know, would we say the same about a straight actor? You know, like, look at this straight activist, you know, we would never say that about.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting to see how these things pop out, right? Like, because there's so much in here about identity, right? There's so much in the identity of both the author and the identity of the characters. Like right now we're at a time where there aren't a lot of trans authored books. This is just a very new thing. And on top of that, there isn't a lot of diversity in who is writing science fiction, which is still very sad. And that is diversity both like racially and gender wise. And so like, what does this mean for us? That like this author is incredibly diverse and brings a new complete experience to science fiction with this work, and then includes a multitude of characters that are living in societies that are, you know, difficult for the actors who are told they can't do a certain thing because they're not a man, who are told they can't do a certain thing because they're not like the standard of female. They can't do a certain thing because they're not human. Like so many like barriers are overcome by these people who just want to be able to be themselves and do what they have a passion to do. And like, why do we stop people from doing things they have passions for just because like of identity?
Right. Yeah, another thing that came up in that discussion between Ryka and Charlie Jane is like they kind of mentioned as a joke, like, you know, there was a time where like trans people were almost pitted against each other because like a major like book publisher would only accept one trans voice for all of the like other like men and women, which I felt was like super eye-opening, especially because I think both, I don't know how old Ryka is, but Charlie Jane is like definitely a little bit older. Like they've definitely both experienced this like great culture change throughout their lives, you know, that they've kind of, it's definitely heading in a better direction, but it's taken some time, you know, and I don't know, I think it's just so important to talk about things like that, and like why do we limit it to, okay, we only have one slot for one trans author, when yeah, that's good and all, but you know, one trans person experience is completely different from another. And I even feel like as a queer person, like I had so much angst growing up that the only like books about like homosexuality that I could find was like this one narrative, and it was always guys. I would never see lesbians, and there would always be white, and it would just be like almost like word for word the same general story that wasn't my story, you know? And it kind of pissed me off after a while, because it's like, well, yeah, I'm sure some people can relate to this, but that's not my story, you know? And that doesn't make me any less valid because my story was different. But I can only imagine what it feels like for trans people not being able to find their stories because there's a limited amount out there, you know. Which is why I thought this one was really cool that Katrina was very early in her transition and how that colored a lot of her experiences. Um, I think probably a lot of people can relate to the vulnerability of just being very early into your transition and not really passing yet. So that's probably a phase everyone has to go through.
Yeah, and I mean, this book was moving for me on that front on multiple times. I just found myself crying, and I was like, oh no, what is this book doing to me? I feel like it's an interesting thing to like be seen in such an acute way that like you're just like, wow, this is like too close to home and like not talked about that often in books, and like books that you see like marketed really well. I think that it's an interesting thing too. I was thinking about this today, that like we're in a juxtaposition in the fact that right now there are so many queer and trans books coming out this year, like so many. And then on the same front, we're like watching the government slowly tear down the access that youth have to these very books.
Right.
And that just feels horrible. Like finally you get to a point where like you've like broken the publisher gate that's like standing in your way, and you get there, and then these other people are like, no, I put this other gate here.
I feel like
and
there's
I'm
always
like, what is this? Like this is pretty useless. I kind of really hate that.
It's really scary to be going through historical changes like that, but I think seeing that pushback kind of almost reassures me that we're on the right path. You know, there are people who are trying to ban books, but at the same time we're getting more of those books out there, and hopefully we'll encourage more rebellion too, you know, more people to, okay, like we have some people who are pushing back against us, okay, we're going to push back harder, you know. I think as scary as it is, I think it's a good sign ultimately. Yeah, because unfortunately, like we can't just get along, you know.
Yep.
But
yeah, it's, you know, I think that's too the thing about this story that like really hit home is like Katrina just like wants to be herself and live her life and just like exist. And there's these people who are constantly questioning her existence and pushing back on who she is and not letting her be who she wants to be. And like, that's a really horrible feeling.
yeah, and not also kind of almost trying to define who she is again, to that part where she gets outed in the bio of her, calling her a trans activist. Like she didn't decide that was who she was gonna be. Someone else decided that, you know. They saw who she was and was like, okay, well then she's gotta be trans in this way, you know. If she's gonna be in public, she has to be an activist, you know. And I'm sure that's probably unfortunately common in the experience of being trans, or being told like you have to be very feminine if you're going to be a trans woman. You know, you can't have facial hair if you're going to be a trans woman, or you got to shave your legs if you're going to be a trans woman. And no, that's not right. You know, like I don't always shave, like,
Yeah,
and I'm a cis woman, you know.
There's so much pressure too. I think I read a really good memoir once. I think it was by Kate Dale. Kate Dale writes a lot of like memoirs from her experience as like a trans woman who was also autistic. But like she talked about how like when she would go to like her therapy appointments, she would see these women coming out who were like wearing sweatpants and a sweater, and they didn't have makeup on, and like they hadn't shaved. They just like looked like themselves, like they had rolled out of bed. And here was her in this like fancy skirt with this pearl necklace and this bright red, and like her hair was all done because she knew the only way anyone would take her seriously is if she played this role of like being a hyper feminine person, even though all these other cis women didn't need to do that.
Right.
And I think that that's like the interesting thing too, right, is like you're policed on who you get to be in order for people to recognize you as valid.
Yeah, I think of like all the expectations placed on you for being a cis woman, and this book just kind of highlighted like, okay, it's twice as many expectations if you're going to be a trans woman. You can't look sloppy, you know. You gotta put an effort in every day you're going to be seen, you know. And I can really empathize with that, you know, just kind of looking at my experiences with as being a woman, and you know, trying to understand how it's doubled, you know, by being trans. And it shouldn't be that way, you know. Everyone should be able to express themselves how they want, you know. You can have a beard and say you're a woman. I don't care. Like,
yeah, and I think that, you know, that's like the stacked experience too. Like there's already so much pressure put on women in general, all women, to perform a certain way in order to get past certain roadblocks in society. Like if you want to do something, you have to look a certain way, present a certain way. Like people have to want to like you. You have to be kind and likable and interesting in ways that, you know, men don't have to be. But then on top of that, if you're also a trans woman, you have like a whole nother game to play, that you have to reach those standards even harder. And, you know, I'm sure there are layers built on that, also based on race and sexual identity and, you know, ability status and all of these other elements, English language competency. And before you know it, everyone's just running a race that's stupid to appease a very specific person, which is like what we value in society, right? The like standards. Yeah, and I think that that's interesting too. Like this book tries to defy what the standards of this industry is, right? The industry being, I guess, like classical music. The people that build your instruments and play the instruments and house the instrument things and teach about instruments, that all of the people in this musical world are playing a game to fit to a certain standard, and none of the characters in this story quite fit into that box. And they're all doing their own thing in order to be successful in the music field. And I think that's kind of a cool...
It's such a cool storyline. It wouldn't be the same if it was, you know, Katrina, like, learning classical music and learning how to fit in that very classical sense. I like that she gets to carve out her own, like, way of success and how that does reflect her own experiences. It's such a deeply layered story in that aspect.
Yeah, I like that too. You know, I like that it wasn't about teaching someone the standards or like to be a part of like the set society or the set way of playing, because that would have been a very boring story too, in my opinion. But like I find it's really cool. And now I don't know why I didn't realize that this was even a subgenre I liked, given that like one of my favorite TV shows, and I don't watch TV a ton, but one of my favorite TV shows that I've watched like 5 times is The Queen's Gambit. And I don't even like chess or care about chess at all. And this book kind of scratched that same need. Like I know nothing about violins, nothing about classical music, but yet it had this like idea of like subverting the way society has like stopped people from doing certain things, that like just made you like, yeah, this is really cool. I'm like rooting for these characters to like be successful in like a completely different way and not like studying the mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that's personally more relatable to me. You know, I feel like I've gone a very unconventional route of becoming a writer. So to me, it's like, oh yeah, like it is doable, you know. You can carve out your own way in life. Not that I'm successful yet, but
yeah, you know, I think, yeah, I would say probably my last thought that came to mind on this thought was it the other day I was listening to a podcast I really like. It's called Gender Reveal, and it's a podcast that's all hosted by trans people, and they talk to trans people that do different kinds of things. And they often have authors on the podcast, and they were talking to, I forget their name, but they're the author of a book called High Risk Homosexual that I do know. And the author was talking about how, like, you know, when they went through the traditional like schooling for writing, which is an experience that I also had, you know, there's this sense that you do these workshops where you just kind of quietly sit there and pretend you're not there while people talk about your work, because that's like the real experience that like you don't get to defend what you chose to do. And the question is like, why? Because that doesn't work for us. Like, I think like the way, you know, a lot of people write, and in specifically in this instance, it was the way a lot of trans people write, is that we have a lot of commentary on why we chose to do things the way we did. And that needs to be said.
Yeah.
So like, why would it work for us to go through a traditional method where we just sit there and like be like, oh, whatever, you know, the cis reader decides is they want to see is what we want them to see? Like, maybe not. And so it's interesting that even just like in every field, there are these like standards of things that people have been doing for a very long time, but they're built around a person that still does art, but is like more becoming, hopefully, you know, less prevalent in our writing, in our art, in our music. And so like, how can we change to accommodate a diversity of sets of voices and the way that a diverse set of people do art?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really cool point.
Yeah. This is just me rambling, apparently.
No, I'm glad you bring it up, because I feel like that is such a important theme of what this book was trying to say. You know, it wasn't it had so much more to say than just being like, oh, here's a book with trans rep. You know, it really dug into it. Yeah. Any final thoughts or any more thoughts? 'Cause we're a little over an hour, but I usually go until we run out. So
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else. I'm sure eventually I'll have more thoughts that come up, because they always do. But I think that was like the main set of feelings. It's weird because, you know, when I initially was reading this book, even when I finished it, it was really hard for me to rate the book, because I like felt so torn on so many things. I ended up giving it 5 stars, mainly because I'm trying really hard to give 5 stars to books that I feel like tried really hard to be a 5-star book.
nice.
Like the author really put in the work to make something exceptional. And even if I didn't think it was particularly exceptional, I like really want to value that. Like, I don't think that I would reread this book. And that's usually for me what gives a book 5 stars is rereadability.
Oh.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, if I really love a book, but I can't see myself rereading it, it gets 4 stars. And if I really love a book and I can see myself rereading it, I give it 5 stars. This is just my system. And while I would not see myself rereading this book, I feel like I got everything the first time, that I didn't miss anything, that I wouldn't be missing anything by not rereading this book. At the same time, it changed my life. Like, I wouldn't be the same person if I hadn't read it. And so like, I feel like that merited like a much higher rating. Like, just the fact that it made an impact on the way I live my life.
Yeah, I gave it 4 stars because, again, I found the writing style just didn't work for me. But it is a very fond 4 stars. You know, I think this book is excellent. I definitely recommend it. I don't usually reread books ever, so that's not really part of my rating system, because I just have too much to read. I don't have time to reread. But yeah, this is going to be a book that I think sticks with me, though. So even though it's not a 5-star for me, like, coming from me, 4-star is still a very good book, you know. So
yeah. And I think I'm trying to remember like if this is a debut or not.
Let me see.
I'm like just stalking the author.
No, she has other books.
It does look like she's written some other things, but like
I think if I recall from what she said in the interview that I was watching, this is the first like mainstream publisher she worked with. Um, so she has like 4 other books it looks like, but um, obviously this is a much bigger publication than the other ones she's worked with before. This is also nominated for the Hugo Award for anyone who follows the Hugos. So I think well-deserved nomination and good luck to her.
Yeah, I think that whatever she writes next is going to be like extremely phenomenal. It can only get better
I'm
from here. So
definitely going to look out for her future works. I'm curious to see where she goes with her writing style. Um, it wasn't so bad that I had to put the book down. I found like the actual story and characters so enjoyable that I bet whatever she writes next I will like as much too. But I'm also just curious to see how she evolves as a writer too, because I feel like
yeah.
it's still kind of just beginning for her. So.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that I have to like constantly remind myself is like, you know, I try to be as like nice as possible. I'm like I might be too nice when it comes to reading books sometimes, but like want to be like, oh, this person, it's their first like real popular published work. Like that is a feat in of itself. Like that's amazing. And I haven't done that, so I'm just gonna give
Right.
credence to that. I think that like there's always something to find. I've definitely read books that I have not liked,
Yeah.
that I have just given the worst star ratings ever. But usually I feel a pretty good reason when that happens.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh, yeah.
so I think that this book really deserves a lot of praise and a lot of awards because it's doing a lot of really cool things. And even if there were parts of it that I didn't enjoy as much, didn't like as much, or felt weren't as fleshed out or would have done differently, that doesn't like take away from how amazing it is overall, which is why I just like bumped it all the way up there and was like, you get a 5-star.
Nice. All right, I think that's it from us today. Anything coming up on your channel that you would like to advertise, Joan?
You know, not really. I wish.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar situation where I'm gonna be kind of quiet for the next 2 months, so I will be in and out a lot on BookTube, but this is really fun. And I feel like I appreciate this book so much more too after getting the chance to talk about it.
Same.
Yeah. All right. So I think that'll do it for today. Thanks everyone for watching. And if you haven't picked up this book yet, do so because you will be missing out if you don't. All right. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.